Today on Let's Talk Limbic Sparks, we're with Stephan Gans, who is Senior Vice President, Chief Insights and Analytics Officer at PepsiCo. I'm Kevin Perlmutter, Chief Strategist and founder of Limbic Brand Evolution, a brand consultancy that taps into emotional insights to strengthen connections between brands and people.
And I'm co-host Jasmine Moradi, behavioral sound scientist passionate about quantifying how sound impacts consumers' emotions.
The limbic system part of our brain supports our emotion, motivation, behavior, and memory. Jasmine and I love to talk with brand leaders who appreciate how these subconscious functions impact conscious human behavior. We're curious about how our guests are creating what I call limbic sparks, which happen when emotional motivation meets brand desire. We want to know what makes our guests tick and how they are applying emotional insight to drive business growth for the brands that they serve. Thank you so much, Stephan, for being with us today, and let's talk Limbic Sparks.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you, Stephan. How are you doing today?
Nice to meet you too, Jasmine, Kevin. I am in Greenwich, Connecticut, where I live, which, other than a lovely place to live, is also close to PepsiCo's global headquarters, which is in Purchase, New York, where I have not been for the past year because of COVID, but this is where I live, and I'm doing pretty well today. Thank you.
Talking about the pandemic, we've all had a chance to think and prioritize about the things that are most important to us. What would you say are the 3 to 5 things that you care most about in your life and your career?
First of all, of course, there's my family, my immediate family, so my wife and my 4 kids, and my extended family, all of whom live in the Netherlands, which is far away. And in the context of the pandemic, that I mean, this is obviously not a surprising answer, but what the pandemic, I'm used to living in the States with my extended family being in Europe, and I'm used to knowing that I can jump on a plane anytime and be with them, be with my parents or anybody else from my family if I wanted to or needed to. That of course has been suddenly really much more complicated. So to your point, that made me realize even more than ever before what it means to actually be far away, and how important those relationships are for me. Another thing that's really important for me is let's say the outdoors. So I live on a river. I'm overlooking a little lake here. I spend a lot of time outside, and and I like the outside in this part of the world a lot. So that's a key reason why I'm here. And when it comes to work, I consider myself incredibly, as Americans say, blessed with the fact that I work at PepsiCo, which is a company that has so far been able to weather the pandemic quite well, right? So of course, the pandemic is a disaster in too many different ways to describe for all of us and for a lot of people. And it has brought a lot of change to our business. But the company has done a remarkable job shifting gears and really taking really good care of the business, of its customers, but also of its employees. So I consider myself really lucky to be in this place. And then finally, I love the job that I have, right? So I'm responsible for consumer insights, and I like people a lot, and I happen to be the most curious person I know. So I'm also in a constant state of amazement, even more than I was before the pandemic, about why consumers, why people like myself and the two of you, why we do what we do and why we make the decisions that we make, both big and small decisions.
Very interesting. And when you say that you really like people, so then when it comes to friendships, the friends who you are closest with today, what would you say are some of the things that you value most in those relationships?
Both camaraderie and mutual challenge. So I like friendships where I can be, well, obviously the camaraderie angle, where I feel safe and where I feel home in the non-literal sense of the word, but also I like friendships that challenge me, and I like hanging out with friends that I can challenge on anything, on what we think or believe, or just to make fun of each other.
It's usually the best part.
Yeah, sometimes it is. Yeah.
The reason I ask you specifically about this question is because I think that there are often commonalities between what people value in human relationships and the values that they associate with the brands that are important in their lives. So describe for us a brand experience that you recently had that was very, very frustrating. No need to name the brand, just what about the experience that was so bad?
I go to those service type of brands, and there is a company here called Optimum, which is which could not have chosen its name more cynically. They provide internet, and they provide TV, and they provide those type of services to my home, and there's a peculiar situation with them is that I don't really have another option, and they know it, and so whenever something is amiss with them, which is quite often, especially at this time of year, because I live in the United States. So every cable goes above ground. So every tree branch that falls anywhere in the Northeast messes up my internet. They position themselves as a brand. So that is a very, let's say, difficult relationship. To make that connection that you just made, Jasmine, I don't feel any camaraderie whatsoever with those people.
I have to interject for a second, Stephan, and say that Optimum is the only brand that I've ever in my life reported to the Better Business Bureau. Just a coincidence there. We didn't know that before this.
You should join the force then, Kevin. I'm ready. I'm ready to help fight your cause.
But me not being American, or I haven't been, how come it's the only choice?
Yeah, that's a good point. But
after today's society, right? There's so
exactly.
many.
But technically there is another choice, and that is you buy a satellite dish, right? And you put it on your roof, and you go that way. But again, that is a big hassle. Plus, I said earlier, a little bit about how I live. There's a lot of trees, very high trees around my house. So a satellite dish apparently is also not ideal. So I'm really kind of screwed. I'm stuck with this company.
So let's go to the positive side of it then. So now we are curious to know, what about a memory from a really good brand experience?
Is music in my house, and music to help change let's say the vibe in the house, or change something around. And I'm not bringing this up just because it happens to be a space of your area of interest, Jasmine.
No, I'm sure.
There's two brands I can pick, Spotify and Sonos. Let me pick Sonos there, because Sonos has really made it so easy to access music in so many practical ways. And it just works so well. That is a brand that I have very positive experiences with, like every single day.
Would you then say that Sonos are great at working with limbic sparks in their experiences? Did you like the emotional motivation meet brand desire feeling?
Sonos is really one of those brands that has such a strong product that the moment I remember let's say, discovering that product and discovering the benefits of that product, I was already sold, if you want. the Sonos is not a brand that's, at least in my perception, has spent a lot of time or money convincing me of anything but their functional excellence. From day one, created products that are not necessarily gorgeous, but acceptable, right, to put in your house. That struck a chord with me, and so yeah, I guess you could call that a limbic spark, right?
And how many products of Sonos do you have? You have to like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
7, I think. 7 different speakers, basically, right? Yeah. And an app.
Yeah. Yeah. And then so Sonos and Spotify together becomes even more spark.
I want to dig deeper into this area of brand desire. And Stephan, you and I have known each other for quite a while, but I'm going to ask you to pretend that we're just meeting for the first time and ask you to describe yourself. But I want you to do it only naming 5 brands.
I'm incredibly curious. So I think Wikipedia, Google, not so much only for its search, but also because I now have like 2 of these Google speakers in my house that I talk with a lot, because I come across a word I don't know, or something I don't know, or a bird I see outside my window that I don't know. I would say Patagonia, that is about the outdoors. Let's stick with Sonos as a brand that links really to my home life and my family life. Peloton, which is a brand I spend a lot of time with these days.
I want to ask you about another type of brand in your life, and this would be a brand from your childhood. Is there a brand that you grew up with, a brand, something that just was very important to you back then, that has, whether or not you still use it, has significant meaning or emotional connection or brings back certain memories in your life?
MTV.
It's a great one. Why is that?
When I think about MTV and into MTV coming, let's say, into my life, I had left my parents' house, and I was really enjoying my newfound freedom a lot. MTV also did something that I will never forget, which I think is just incredibly fantastic, is that they wanted to be on 24/7, but of course they didn't have content to be on 24/7. So they did this thing, what they put on at night, starting like 1 or 2 a.m. And it was called landscape television. So they would put a camera under a plane or a helicopter or whatever, and fly across northern Sweden or Scotland or southern Spain or whatever. And if I would come back home from a night of drinking with my friends, and we would be we had this communal space, and which also was our kitchen, and landscape television would be on, and we would watch landscape television.
Wow, MTV is what a brand. I mean, I remember when MTV came out, and it was so breakthrough, and all of a sudden you got to meet these bands through their videos, and I could still remember some of the iconic the first videos. Like I'll start naming them, but that will be weird.
But to your point, sorry to interrupt, but to your point, I think that's actually a third really important thing that it did for me. Much like what TikTok does now, it opens up this incredible can of creativity, right? Mm-hmm. If you spend half an hour on TikTok, right, which I do every now and then, because I'm just mind boggled. MTV was really indeed opening up a similar type of outlet for creativity with the videos that bands were making. It was really spectacular. And then, of course, there was Christiane Bakker, who was one of the first VJs in Europe, mm-hmm. who I was completely in love with. But we all were.
So aside from her and some of the other things that you mentioned, what are some of the things that you think they did strategically? I mean, they launched this incredible music revolution that never existed before. What do you think the leaders of that brand and the folks who ran MTV were doing right back then, with your knowledge now as a brand strategy leader?
If you think about the 3 angles that I just mentioned, right?
Mm-hmm.
From given my background and my phase in life that I was when MTV came into my life, those are very deep emotional territory. Steps into fundamental needs and emotions, like, for example, the newly found freedom that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
If you can become an icon for that, then your brand relationship can't really get much stronger than that. And I think, like, in the words that I know, that I would know now, that I would apply to it now, given my God knows 25 or so years of experience as a marketing person, I think the power was really the power of authenticity, right? So it was really, they really wanted to do this. I mean, and there was really nothing felt contrived or forced or even thought about for that much necessarily, right? It was just raw, authentic. We want to celebrate music and artists and creativity.
Yeah. But what about this feeling? I'm wondering if you guys felt that. What about this emotional feeling of knowing that next seat that could come makes you high, right? Like, for example, if we knew that in the 90s, let's say Backstreet Boys had a new video coming out, we could sit and wait for like the next one, and there you had it. So it was almost like Christmas. You could sit and wait for that cool video coming up. And I think I feel the same when I'm watching like short videos on Facebook and then TikTok. It's like, when is that video coming that's giving you that rush?
Well, yeah, it's an interesting point also, I think, because at the time, the sequence of those videos and you would attribute that to the VJ, to one of those people that was like, supposedly, what wasn't the case, they were just the figurehead, right? Like the talking head in your camera, but or in your screen. Today, that's being replaced by algorithms now, right? Where they talk TikTok or what's the next song that you hear on Spotify. And so there's that is, of course, a really interesting revolution where my oldest daughter, Sarah, the other day, I don't know how we got to talk about it, but she was really excited. She literally said, like, no, it's really cool. My Spotify algorithm is really smart now. It knows exactly what I like. Training a little monkey kind of thing.
To give you these rushes all the time, right?
Yeah.
Non-stop.
So, because she was sending me a song and said, you should, I think you'll like this. And I said, gee, where did you find? I'm being my age. I asked her, how did you find that?
It appeared.
My algorithm is super smart.
Oh man.
So that's really very different. That's actually a really great metaphor for example of what personalization really means, right? From relying on somebody else that you like or for whatever reason to pick things for you, to actually like a machine you can train.
Wow. I'm curious, Stephan, as you think about the values and the core ideals that you bring into the work that you do today, what are some of the things that you learned from mentors across your career that you believe really influence what you strive to do today?
One of the things that somebody once told me, something I guess I intrinsically knew, but it really brought a point home, and I think about that a lot, and that is every great person on your team is a volunteer. And it helps me a lot to think the other way around, and to think, especially for good people, you should treat them as a volunteer, because they can literally work anywhere else, right? So and they get paid, and there's small or big company, doesn't matter, it comes with its benefits. But people need to, especially in a leadership role, you need to make sure that the good people have a reason to go to work every day that is beyond having to pay the mortgage or saving for their retirement.
Well, I always remember that about working with you, as your style and your just the way you approach your team is just so sincere all the time, and you're always looking out for their best interest, which I always appreciated.
Yeah, and I'm gonna be look. Not selective. I'm always going to be sincere, and I'll try to. Or I think I don't really have a choice. I'm always authentic, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really know how to not be, but
it's not very common.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot.
In big companies.
Yeah, in big companies, I've heard I get that feedback often, but I really honestly, for me, that is effortless. Where I got in trouble myself, and that was in the earlier part of my careers, is where I tried to be somebody I wasn't, right? So
right.
I got into a leadership role and I thought, okay, so now this means I need to do this, or I need to behave in a certain way or whatever. Then things came crashing down and I completely lost it. One of my favorite sayings is that the older I get, the more I start to look like myself. And that is that is arguably the biggest kind of source of strength that I have. It's just in being myself. Not that I'm so great, but it's just.
But you're you, yeah.
But I'm you. I'm me.
Yeah,
I'm not you. I'm me. I'm me, and I can also only, to be honest, it's the only way to do jobs like the one I'm doing now. It's just, it takes too much energy from me to try and be somebody else.
Yeah. Wow.
I can't do that.
Wow. We want to get into that, your role right now, and understand a bit more about it. And I know Jasmine has a few questions about the details of the analytics part of your role. But before we start there, can you just share a bit more about the brands that you support and what inspires you about the role that you have, the team you have around you?
Yeah, sure. So I lead a global function in PepsiCo, right? Consumer insights. And so my team supports all the brands that PepsiCo has. So there's a lot of beverages brands, like obviously Pepsi, Mountain Dew, Gatorade, SodaStream, etc. And there's a lot of food brands, Lay's, Quaker, Doritos, you name it. So that's a broad set of brands. If you look at one level deeper beyond the big master brands, in a lot of different subcategories, what all those categories have in common, and hence what all the brands have in common, is that it's the type of brands and products that are like incredibly common. They're like daily usage. There's nothing pretentious, or there's nothing let's say there's nothing that is not day to day about them. And and so to your question, that is exactly what I love about them. I love working with brands that touch, or at least can touch, people's everyday life in unassuming ways, funny ways, functional ways. Sometimes a little, like maybe a little bit assuming when they position themselves as a treat. But very practical ways, like, my God, I did a big workout and I could do with a Gatorade drink now. So I love that. I love the everydayness of life, and I love the everydayness of the brands and the products that my business is in. So that gives me, that truly is a source of energy for me.
When I'm listening to you, I hear that we are very similar. I'm also very much like interested in people and figuring out how they work and when they're testing things. So we're interested to know, what shifts have you implemented around collecting consumer insights since you started?
Let me talk about two areas where we made a lot of changes. So the first one is a bit more, let's say, internal, because the function that I lead is used to be completely decentralized, right? And to the extent that there were as many different ways of running a certain type of consumer test as there were insights teams in PepsiCo. And PepsiCo is a large company, right? So there's roughly 600 people working in insights and analytics across the world. So if everybody does their work in roughly in different ways, you've got 600 ways of doing a certain type of test, 600 ways of collecting data, if you want, 600 different ways of forming an opinion whether something is a good idea to pursue for a brand or a business or not.
Wow.
And and some of those 600 ways would be brilliant and the best way to do it out there, and many others weren't. Simple. So what we did is we standardized and digitized a lot of the ways of working in consumer insights, which means that we can now leverage our scale, which has multiple advantages. So we have, it has an advantage that we use better tools. It has the advantage that we better methodologies. It has an advantage that we can work faster. It has advantages that we can work a lot cheaper. But arguably the most important advantages are in the space of that we're now collecting data that is comparable and usable, that teaches us about, I don't know, for example, breakfast behavior, if we're doing research around how people have breakfast, either in their home or on the go, or how that is changing because they're spending more time at home now. For our Quaker business, for example, and doesn't matter if we do that in the Philippines or in Germany or in Argentina or in Canada, the data we collect, we do that in such a way that we can look across and we can do what then is often called meta learning. So we don't only learn in Canada, but we learn about consumer behavior and breakfast, and we can see similarities between Argentina and the Philippines. Maybe I'm just making this up. So there's a phenomenal amount of time and energy has gone and still goes into that, into really becoming one tight-knit functional family with one way of working, so we can be smarter. Another big focus area is in finding, for each and every specific business challenge where we want to learn from consumers, is finding the right balance between data-driven types of insights and empathy, qualitative methodologies. In most places in the world, and for most businesses, and I believe that you're best served with both angles, right? So both a qualitative and a quantitative, you could say, or a data-driven and an empathy-driven type of angle. And where those two intersect, that's where the best learning happens.
And how are you then specifically working on improving the reliability of the data to understand and predict your consumer behavior?
There's no really one size fits all answer to that. Jasmine, it's for example, when we take the example of testing of advertising ideas, right? So we used to do all of that with an external party that has a well-established methodology that we don't like a lot because the methodology is basically rooted still in those days that my parents and I would sit on my parents' couch and we would watch TV all night. And lo and behold, there's an ad, and oh my God, let's now talk about what we think about the ad, right? That's not, that's kind of a far cry from today's reality.
Yeah, it's not current.
So we created a different way of testing TV advertising ideas. We created that ourselves not with a research agency, but with a technology partner. And we now created a tool that actually turns out, because we've now run it thousands of times, does an incredibly good job in predicting the sales impact of a certain piece of advertising. So if we air this particular campaign, we know it's going to drive a positive sales outcome, and with a likelihood of in the like high 80%. So like a correlation between the creative that you put on and the ultimate outcome. Whereas the traditional external tool, the correlation would be in the 20s, right? So the ability for data to be predictive is of course, that is something that's crucial. And there's many different parts of PepsiCo where we're building capabilities around that. Think about e-commerce, which has grown at accelerated pace over the past year, as I'm sure you know. Which is e-commerce is an environment that is of course incredibly data rich, and where the marketing influencing and the action is right. People are buying something or not buying something, are all in one measurable and trackable ecosystem. So you can learn very much very quickly there about what does work, what doesn't work, in terms of advertising or in terms of promotions, or in terms of innovation.
So let's look into the emotional side of the customer experience. I know that research has indicated that emotion is the most important component. Therefore, we are interested to know, what role does emotion play at PepsiCo in creating more brand desire for your customers?
The products need to fulfill a certain need. And very often in our businesses, those needs are very, let's say, physical, right? So there's a thirst or hunger, or there's a desire to nibble on something for stress relief or whatever. But there's functional needs, there's taste needs and desires. And why Gatorade? Why an energy drink or some kind of replenishment from Gatorade instead of just water and a banana, right? And so a brand has a role to play in explaining, why that product makes sense functionally, but by appealing to the athlete within, right? All of us, or many of us, Gatorade is actually able to link, to make you really feel good about yourself.
These emotional efforts that you guys have been working with, have they led to a better customer experience and a more effective marketing? Have you seen that?
For sure, yeah. I mean,
how?
Well, it's first of all, it's defendable, because if you stick only with your functional, others can do that too. So you create a space in and a set of associations with consumers that are unique. Between the factory where we make our products and the usage of those products by consumers, there's of course there's a long way to go, right? So through sales channels and through that are owned by our customers, and having a strong brand that has appeal beyond the functional space, that allows you to let's say build those relationships with our customers that help us get the product to our consumers ultimately, in the vast majority of cases still. That really helps us create excitement in a store that draws consumers in. It helps us with really growing a category and making a strategy with our customers to grow a category, so the customer is ultimately growing their business. So it has a lot of, let's say, organizing benefits beyond the pure functional benefits of the product.
But then it's interesting to know, like your brands, PepsiCo's brands, have worked many years with building up this emotional marketing or branding. And then the impact of COVID has now forever changed people's emotional state of mind and needs. It has totally disrupted consumption habits and desires. Then it's interesting to understand, what changes have you noticed in your consumers' behaviors and emotions, and how have your brands responded to that?
A key job of my my function and my teams is to figure out which of the things that we're now seeing around us are really going to stick. Yeah, which of the things are here to stay? How? Because that's important for our business, right? Think about. If you think about like drinks, or think about all those brands that have marketed convenient breakfasts to us over the past decade, and how that was all created with commutes in mind, right? And then you got to get your train, and then you can have your breakfast on the train because it's a liquid whatever thing, and now suddenly nobody's on that train anymore. And so is that coming back? Are people just all going back into their cars and their train and commuting like we were before? Or are we not going to do that? That is an important thing to know for brands who will work in that space.
It's going to be so interesting to see how these behaviors continue to evolve and which stick and which revert. That's going to be fascinating to see over the next period of time. We've talked a lot about the intersection of emotional motivation and when it creates and meets with brand desire, this idea that we call limbic sparks. What do you believe is the best way for brands to think about creating limbic sparks right now?
That intersection of differentiation and authenticity. No, I should say the intersection of relevance and authenticity. That's better.
Okay. Relevance and authenticity. That is fantastic.
Yeah. And if you hit that sweet spot, then you can have all the sparks you want.
That is great. When you think about brands that are not thinking about emotion and emotional insights, why do you think that some brands are not going there? There's so much proven power, yet it is still a often neglected or under-leveraged aspect of brand leadership.
Yeah, it's a complete over-reliance then on the functional benefits that people think they have, and that, well, or that people may have, but that people think are unique and defendable, and I think I think in today's world, I can't think of any functional benefit in and of itself is defendable for too long a time.
One more question: as a brand leader, what is it you know now that you wish you knew years ago?
Well, I think it's a bit like maybe a bit of a comment from a guy with gray hair, but it's about the long term, not the short term, right? I think I was incredibly focused in the early 10-15 years of my career on short-term impact, and that was also, by the way, what I was asked to do and really rewarded for. Partly, I guess, because of my age and the role I have, but also because of the pandemic, what you see is the businesses that are truly resilient. I mean, the specific short-termism is highly overstated. Right? Proper stewardship of a brand and a business for the long haul is what businesses need, and in the situation we are in today proves how powerful and important that is.
Yeah.
So continues to be able to employ just roughly 275,000 people because our business is so resilient and because we're so well able to pivot where we need to. And we're able to pivot because we have phenomenal capabilities and strong brands that have been well taken care of for a long, long, long time. That is incredibly, that has benefits that I didn't really connect with early on in my career. I wish I did, though.
This has been an incredible conversation. If people want to contact you, what's the best way?
Through LinkedIn.
Yeah.
People can send me an email at Stephan Gans at PepsiCo.com. That would work.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Oh, thank you so much for joining us on Let's Talk Limbic Sparks. This has been a fantastic conversation, and we're just so thrilled that you can be here and share all of this experience and insight with us. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.